Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we like to start. I make a first Dutch announcement. Als u het in het Nederlands wilt volgen, moet u een koptelefoon ophalen. Ik neem dat iedereen die dat wil hem nu heeft. In geval van twijfel haalt u een koptelefoon op. Want dan kan u hem altijd nog halverwege opzetten. Goed, geen probleem? Oké. We like to start the evening program now. And we will run for you a couple of movies, small short ones and long ones, longer ones, with 3 cases of, let's say, neuroscience point of views and situations. And I think we should be able to address that very well after this morning with the 3 lectures and the workshops. And this program will be presented by our German members. To start with Sieglinde, Plocki and Rolf Kammer and Claudia. And that will be later on. So first a small thing to start with, then 3 movies, and then we will have a type of workshop in raising questions about what you have seen. And then we can start to discuss that, and then we have 3 very practical cases to take under let's say the micro lens. Yeah? Okay?
Thank you. So, goedenavond, dames en heren. I try. So, we have worked, we were already presented, so you know we came from Germany. Every year we are coming now, and we are always very happy to be with all of you here. And it is really a chance for a nice get-together always with friends, sharing our ideas and learning your ideas. We have the whole day talked already about what consciousness is. Let me repeat shortly. We have said that it is active and reflecting. It is the power to perceive. It is action and reaction. It is interaction with other consciousness beings, like we are doing just now. And it has always a spiritual and a material side. And I think the first presentation we have for you now, that is Hans-Peter Dürr, shows more this scientific view on our subject. And let me explain with some words who Hans-Peter Dürr is. He was born in 1929 in Stuttgart, Germany, and graduated in physics in 1953. In the following years, by working closely with the famous physicist Heisenberg, he was able to contribute substantially to the field of quantum physics. He worked with Heisenberg on the so-called unified field theory and succeeded him as director of the Max Planck Institute for Physics and Astrophysics and of the Werner Heisenberg Institute for Physics in Munich. He held his position with one short break until 1992. After this, he dedicated himself more and more to neighboring sectors of his main field of work, including epistemology, what a word, epistemology, okay, sorry, philosophy, and social political causes. He received for this a lot of international recognition. In the 1980s, Dürr advocated the cause of peace as a member of the International Pugwash Conference on Science and World Affairs, whose main objective is the elimination of all weapons of mass destruction, nuclear, chemical, and biological, and of war as a social institution to settle international disputes. You see, he is a person who is really has really a broad perspective on life, and you will understand that even more when you now will listen his words in the film we will show you.
Okay, let's start.
Die moderne Physik, bei der die Materie als etwas erscheint, was nur in großer Vergröberung unserem Auge sichtbar ist und das deshalb für uns so wichtig ist, weil unser Verstand dazu gedacht ist, die Welt zu manipulieren, also mit unserer Hand zu begreifen, übersieht, dass im Grunde und der Ursprung alles dieses Seins eigentlich der Geist ist, das noch gar nicht diese materielle Form hat. Dass das, was wie Materie ist, letzten Endes durch eine Gerinnung des Geistes entsteht. Ich sage deshalb immer, die Materie ist die Kruste des Geistes. Und wenn ich nur die Kruste betrachte, dann verstehe ich überhaupt nicht, was der Grund dieser Welt ist. Weil genau das, was gewonnen ist, hat sozusagen an der Evolution nicht mehr teil, sondern wird nur noch als Mittel und Werkzeug verwendet, um die nächsten Evolutionsstufen vorzubereiten. Die treibende Kraft ist immer das Geistige. Das heißt, wenn wir als Menschen den Eindruck haben, wir können die Zukunft gestalten, ist das keine Illusion. Die Zukunft ist offen und wir sind wirklich echt schöpferisch tätig, die Zukunft zu gestalten. Die Zukunft ist nicht eine noch nicht gewusste Vergangenheit. Die Zukunft ist wirklich offen und deshalb brauchen wir auch das Instrument der Hoffnung, weil die Hoffnung gibt uns ein Bild, wie wir die Zukunft gestalten wollen und die Hoffnung kann realisiert werden. Und wir sind nicht total gebunden, nur Materie einfach zu verschieben. Ja? Und das ist selbstverständlich wichtig für uns. Wenn wir manchmal verzweifeln zu sagen, sage nicht, das passiert notwendig mit 100%iger Sicherheit aufgrund der Naturgesetze. Nein, die Naturgesetze sagen uns, wir können mit der Zukunft auch etwas tun, was es vorher noch nicht gegeben hat.
So far, the first statement, now the second.
Geist kann Materie werden, aber Materie kann nicht mehr zum Geist werden. Sondern wir als Menschen haben einen materiellen Körper, das ist der Teil, den wir greifen können, den nehmen wir so furchtbar wichtig, aber wir sind eigentlich immer ein Teil dieses einen Geistes, weil der Geist ja nicht teilbar ist. Also ich habe eigentlich mehr das Bild, wenn ich an mich selber denke oder an die Menschen denke, mehr als ein Ozean, der immer ein Ozean ist, der nun etwas im Winde Wellen schlägt und es bilden sich Schaumkämme. Und diese weißen Schaumkämme, die schauen sich wechselseitig an und sagen, du bist getrennt von mir. Ja? Und jeder ist ein Individuum unabhängig vom anderen. Aber sie haben 2 Kilometer Ozean unter sich. Sie sind überhaupt nicht getrennt, sondern nur die Welle macht so, als ob sie getrennt werden. Und das ist für uns sichtbar. Und das Weiße des Schaumkamms ist sozusagen das Materielle. Das nehmen wir furchtbar ernst. Wenn wir sterben, sinken wir in den Ozean wieder zurück. Das heißt, als geistige Wesen verschwinden wir eigentlich nicht, sondern wir gehen wieder zurück, aus dem wir ausgestülpt wurden.
Okay, first the question. Could you catch everything or shall we repeat it? Is okay? Okay. So, it is interesting for us, especially with regard to the following contributions, to ask now, how can it be that such a highly qualified scientist start to reason in the way that we have just heard? In order to come up with a reasonably satisfactory answer to this question, we have to go back, to the 1950s, when Dürr was working with Heisenberg. In other words, back to a time of radical developments in the fields of physics. While scientists with established reputation like Planck and Einstein started the process of epoch-making changes in the last century physics, it thanks to the 20-year-old Heisenberg that the young generation of physicists at that time began to view reality in a more liberal way than had been usually the case at that time, and to a certain extent till is today. This generation, and especially Heisenberg himself, regarded it as a kind of a quantum jump to admit now the idea that reality has a spiritual basis. Heisenberg propounded his principles of uncertainty, described a little bit simpler for non-physicists. This is: you can either determine the place of a particle or its course, but never both at the same time. This is therefore impossible. It is therefore impossible to calculate the course of a particle, which gives the way to the assumption that the particle has a kind of free will and therefore a kind of consciousness. Moreover, it was recognized that classical inductive models of perception only led science to focus more and more on always smaller parts of material particles, without being able to ever identify the smallest material building block of life, as every newly discovered object was also a compound of even smaller particles with more unknown spaces in between. This fact, and as Dürr states in his book, we experience more than we understand, our manipulative way to observe things, that is, to look at them, how they could serve us best to secure our survival, form the crux of the whole system of science. As this biased way of observation can never lead to a real picture of the status of the universe. The more open, deductive epistemology lately applied in quantum physics finally led to the conclusion that the so-called quantum objects, according to the method of approach, either show qualities of a wave or a particle, being neither of them at the same time. This leads then, crossly described, to the particles endued with free will, wave crests and atomic clouds without matter, and to those spilling waves of which Hans-Peter Dürr just spoke. The conclusion that the spirit is the driving force in the universe results from the assumption that behind every material phenomenon, beginning with the tiniest known material building block, today the quarks, to the universe per se, a potentiality unfolds in space, in which everything is already contained as a noumenon. Dürr calls this potentiality the spirit, and this, we are convinced, hits the mark. Leading quantum scientists have realized that our mind is the reason for our misinterpretation. Hans-Peter Dürr explains that matter is the crust of the spiritual, and this crust is only the last effluent of potential unfoldment, no longer participating in evolution, but serving its framework or vehicle only. By always polarizing and judging material things in order to make them more pragmatical for us, we attach to them qualities and characteristics which are only partly or not at all correct. We are facing two problems here. Firstly, we are reviewing only the outer crust or the white cap and not that part of the wave which extends itself below the surface of the ocean, at least 2 kilometers deep, as Dürr so wonderfully expressed it. And secondly, insufficient attention is paid to the fact that everything is constantly changing and in a flow, and does not stay even a second as it was shortly before. But to put things right, this does not mean at all that all previous scientific attainments are without value. It is very important for our daily life to make use of the knowledge drawn from the observation of the so-called white caps, that is, the manifold material phenomena, as they can serve us as our vehicles, our tools to express ourselves. What kind of craftsman or the surgeon would that be who does not know the quality and the use of his tools? But turning to the basic, to the essential questions of life, we have to be open-minded and to use our inspirational and intuitive faculties of thinking. Under this perspective, we will now watch the next two contributions.
Well, this was a kind of, theoretical approach. And the next two films we will show you are a little bit the more practical side, because they are experiences by two women, which I will present afterwards. At the beginning, we want to show you some main theses which you can find in both films if you watch them carefully. So what we already heard from Hans-Peter Dürr was that every point of infinity is a consciousness center. Everything has all in it. That is a sentence from the esoteric tradition. That is from the Theosophy. The next was from what the Dalai Lama said. That is, from my point of view, he said everything starts with consciousness. And that is exactly what we have worked out during the day already. Erasmus van Rotterdam, which you all will know, said, "The body cannot exist without spirit, but spirit does not need the body." I think about this we could talk a little bit, but we have space for that after the presentation. Also in the esoteric tradition you find, "For the universe is one vast organism, of which everything in it is an inseparable, because inherent and component part. It is a living entity or being, of which the various component parts are some more and some less intelligent than others, some more and some less conscious than others." And furthermore, he said, "But sheer pure consciousness per se is free of limitations in its essence." And I think some of those theses you already heard during this day. So please have a look at the film, and the first one will be Barbara Arrowsmith. She claims she was able to rebuild her brain. Her story is that as a child, in the first grade of primary school, she had a mental block. And what did her teacher tell her? "You will never be able to learn." It was only a part of her brain that was not functioning properly. In her mid-20s, thanks to a book by the Russian neuropsychologist Alexander Luria, she began to understand what was wrong with that part of her brain. And with the help of cognitive exercises, she was able to redevelop or retrain that part of her brain. Amazingly, by the age of 30, her brain was working more or less normally. And these results changed her life totally. Since then, she helped thousands of children with learning disabilities. And I think she is really a good example about all the subject we discussed today. So please enjoy.
I want to share a little secret, which I hope will not be a secret by the end of the talk. I am truly, madly, deeply passionate about the human brain. Science has taught us that our brain shapes us, that it makes us uniquely who we are. And if we think about our brain, it has 200 billion neurons. Think about the world's population. That's a mere 7 billion. And we have hundreds of trillions of connections in the brain. If we imagine all the stars in the Milky Way galaxy, there are more connections in our brain than all of those stars combined. So this incredibly complex organ that we carry with us everywhere we go, it does shape who we are. It is a filter. It filters our perceptions and our understanding of ourselves, of others, of our world, and of our place in that world. And what is incredibly amazing is no two brains are exactly alike. If you look at the person next to you and you note all the physical differences between you, the shape of your nose, the color of your eyes, your height, there are more differences between your two brains than all of those physical differences in combination. So our brain does make us uniquely us. And I'm here today to share with you my story, and it's the story of how I came to learn that not only does our brain shape us, but that we can actually shape our brain. And my story began in grade 1. And in grade 1, I was identified as having a mental block. I was told I had a defect. And I was told I would never learn like other children. And really, the message at that time was loud and clear. I was told I needed to learn to live with those limitations. And this was 1957, and it was the time of the unchangeable brain. And childhood was a profound struggle for me. I couldn't tell time. I couldn't understand the relationship between an hour hand and a minute hand on a clock. I couldn't understand language. Most of what I read or heard was really as intelligible as the Jabberwocky. I could understand concrete things. If somebody said to me, the man is wearing a black coat, I could paint a picture in my head, and I could understand that. But what I couldn't do was understand concepts or ideas or relationships. So lots of things were confusing. I pondered, how could my aunt also be my mother's sister? And what did that fraction, 1/4, really mean? Any kind of abstract concept was hard for me. Irony in jokes, that was impossible. So I learned to laugh when other people did. Cause and effect, it did not exist in my world. There were no reasons behind why things happened. My world was a series of disconnected bits and pieces, of unrelated fragments. And eventually, my fragmented view of the world ended up causing a very fragmented sense of myself. And that wasn't all. This whole left side of my body was like an alien being, unconnected to the rest of me. I would bang and bump into things on the left side of my body. If I picked up anything in this left hand, I would drop it. If I put this left hand on a hot burner, I would feel pain, but I had no idea where it was coming from. I was truly a danger to myself. My mother, she was convinced I would be dead by the age of 5. And then, if that wasn't enough, I had a spatial problem. I couldn't imagine three-dimensional space. I couldn't create maps in my head. I would constantly get lost, even in my friend's house. Crossing the street instilled terror. I could not judge how far away was that car. Geometry was a nightmare. I felt incredible shame. I felt there was something horribly, horribly wrong with me. And in my child's mind, when I'd heard that diagnosis of having a mental block, I actually thought I had a wooden cube in my head that made learning difficult. And I didn't have a piece of wood in my head, but I wasn't far wrong. I had blockages, as I was later to learn, in very critical parts of my brain. And I tried all the traditional approaches. They were all about compensation and about working around the problem, finding a strength to support a weakness. They were not about trying to address the source of the problem. And they took heroic effort and led to rather limited results for me. Then, grade 8, I hit the wall. I could not imagine how I could go on to high school and handle more complex curriculum. The only option I could see was ending my life. So I decided to end the pain. And the next morning, when I woke up after my failed suicide attempt, I berated myself for not even being able to get that right. So I soldiered on, and part of what kept me going was an attitude that I learned from my father. He was an inventor, and he was passionate about the creative process. And he taught me that if there's a problem and there's no solution, you go out and create a solution. And the other thing he taught me was that before you can solve a problem, you have to identify its nature. So I continued my hunt. I went on to study psychology to try to understand what was wrong with me, what was the source of my problem. And then, in the summer of 1977, something life-altering happened. I met a mind like my own, a Russian soldier, Lyova Zizetsky. The only difference being his mind was shaped by a bullet, and mine had been that way since birth. I met Zizetsky on the pages of a book, The Man with a Shattered World, written by the brilliant Russian neuropsychologist Alexander Luria. As I read Zizetsky's story, he couldn't tell time. He described living in a dense fog. All he got was fragments, bits and pieces. This man was living my life. So now, at the age of 25, in 1977, I knew the source of my problem. It was a part of my brain in the left hemisphere that wasn't working. And then I came across the work of Mark Rosenzweig, and he showed me a solution. Rosenzweig was working with rats, and he found that rats in an enriched and stimulating environment were better learners. And then when he looked at their brains had changed physiologically to support that learning. And this was neuroplasticity in action. Neuroplasticity, simply put, the brain's ability to change physiologically and functionally as a result of stimulation. So now I knew what I had to do. I had to find a way to work, to exercise my brain to strengthen those weak parts. And this was the beginning of my transformation and of my life's work. And I had to believe that humans must have at least as much neuroplasticity, and hopefully more, than rats. So I went on to create my first exercise. And I used clocks, because clocks are a form of relationship, and I had never been able to tell time. So I started with a two-handed clock to force my brain to process relationships. And then I added a third hand, and then a fourth hand, because I wanted to make my brain work harder and harder and harder to pull together concepts and understand their connection. And about 3 to 4 months in, I knew something significant had changed. I'd always wanted to read philosophy and had never been able to understand it. And I just happened to have access to a philosophy library. So I went in and I pulled a book off the shelf and I opened it to a page at random and I read that page and I understood it as I was reading it. This had never happened in my entire life. And then I thought, maybe it's a fluke. Maybe that was just an easy book. So I pulled another book off the shelf, opened it, read it, and understood it. And by the time I was finished, I was surrounded by a pile of 100 books, and I had been able to read and understand each page. So I knew that something had changed. Thank you. My experiment had worked. The human brain was capable of change. And then I decided to create an exercise for that alien part of my body. And for that, I knew I had to work on an area in the right hemisphere, the somatosensory cortex that registers sensation. I created an exercise for that, and I am no longer a danger to myself. And then I decided that spatial problem, because I was really tired of getting lost. And so I created another exercise for that, and I don't get lost. I can actually read maps. I don't like GPSs because I like to read maps now because I can. So I knew now the brain could change. I was living proof of human neuroplasticity. And what really breaks my heart is that I still meet people today, children, individuals that are struggling with learning problems. And they're still being told what I was told in 1957, that they need to learn to live with their limitations. They don't dare to dream. And what I've learned since 1977, when I met Zizetsky and Luria and Rosenzweig, is that yes, our brain does shape us. It impacts how we can engage and participate and be in the world. And every single one of us has our own unique profile of cognitive strengths and weaknesses. And if there's a limitation, we don't necessarily have to live with it. We now know about neuroplasticity, and we can harness the brain's changeable characteristics to create programs to actually strengthen and stimulate and change our brain. And in 1966, Rosenzweig threw down a gauntlet. He said his challenge was, let's take what he learned with rats and apply it to human learning. And we need to embrace that challenge. We need to also challenge current practices that are still operating out of that paradigm of the unchangeable brain. We need to work together to take what we know now about neuroplasticity and develop programs that actually shape our brains to change the future of learning. My vision is of a world that we create in which no child has to live with the ongoing struggle and pain of a learning disability. My vision is that cognitive exercises become just a normal part of curriculum. My vision is that school becomes a place that we go to strengthen our brain, to become really efficient and effective learners engaged in the learning process, where not only as learners can we dare to dream, but we can realize our dream. And to me, this is the perfect marriage between neuroscience and education. Thank you.
So I think this is impressive enough because she is really a good representative of a person who is not only thinking of herself and how to better her material brain, but it is her strong wish behind that to be a helper for all those people who suffer the same problem. Yes, so that is, we will, I think, afterwards also talk about that film. The next person has already been introduced this morning, Jill Balti Taylor. Dr. Taylor was born in 1959. She is a neuroanatomist, author, public speaker. She worked as a researcher at Harvard Medical School. Her field of research was the post-mortem investigation of the human brain as it relates to schizophrenia and severe mental illnesses. At the age of 37, she suffered a massive stroke. Within the next 4 hours, she could have observed herself rapidly losing her ability to process information. At the end of this morning, she was unable to read, to go, to talk, to write, or recall anything in her life. It took her 8 years to completely recover all of her physical function and thinking ability. In February 2008, Dr. Taylor gave a presentation at the prestigious TED conference. A video of that presentation was posted on the website and immediately viewed by millions of people around the world. She has also described her experiences in a book, My Stroke of Insight, and this became a New York Times bestseller. And now, please, you will see Dr. Taylor.
I grew up to study the brain because I have a brother who has been diagnosed with a brain disorder, schizophrenia. And as a sister, and later as a scientist, I wanted to understand why is it that I can take my dreams, I can connect them to my reality, and I can make my dreams come true. What is it about my brother's brain and his schizophrenia that he cannot connect his dreams to a common and shared reality, so they instead become delusion? So I dedicated my career to research into the severe mental illnesses, and I moved from my home state of Indiana to Boston, where I was working in the lab of Dr. Francine Bennis in the Harvard Department of Psychiatry. And in the lab, we were asking the question, what are the biological differences between the brains of individuals who would be diagnosed as normal control, as compared with the brains of individuals diagnosed with schizophrenia, schizoaffective, or bipolar disorder? So we were essentially mapping the microcircuitry of the brain, which cells are communicating with which cells, with which chemicals, and then in what quantities of those chemicals. So there was a lot of meaning in my life because I was performing this type of research during the day. But then in the evenings and on the weekends, I traveled as an advocate for NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. But on the morning of December 10, 1996, I woke up to discover that I had a brain disorder of my own. A blood vessel exploded in the left half of my brain. And in the course of 4 hours, I watched my brain completely deteriorate in its ability to process all information. On the morning of the hemorrhage, I could not walk, talk, read, write, or recall any of my life. I essentially became an infant in a woman's body. If you've ever seen a human brain, it's obvious that the two hemispheres are completely separate from one another. And I have brought for you a real human brain. Thank you. So this is a real human brain. This is the front of the brain, the back of the brain with the spinal cord hanging down. And this is how it would be positioned inside of my head. And when you look at the brain, it's obvious that the two cerebral cortices are completely separate from one another. For those of you who understand computers, our right hemisphere functions like a parallel processor, while our left hemisphere functions like a serial processor. The two hemispheres do communicate with one another through the corpus callosum, which is made up of some 300 million axonal fibers. But other than that, the two hemispheres are completely separate. Because they process information differently, each of our hemispheres think about different things, they care about different things, and dare I say, they have very different personalities. Excuse me. Thank you. It's been a joy. Our right human hemisphere is all about this present moment. It's all about right here, right now. Our right hemisphere, it thinks in pictures, and it learns kinesthetically through the movement of our bodies. Information in the form of energy streams in simultaneously through all of our sensory systems, and then it explodes into this enormous collage of what this present moment looks like, what this present moment smells like and tastes like, what it feels like, and what it sounds like. I am an energy being connected to the energy all around me through the consciousness of my right hemisphere. We are energy beings connected to one another through the consciousness of our right hemispheres as one human family. And right here, right now, we are brothers and sisters on this planet, here to make the world a better place. And in this moment, we are perfect, we are whole, and we are beautiful. My left hemisphere, our left hemisphere, is a very different place. Our left hemisphere thinks linearly and methodically. Our left hemisphere is all about the past, and it's all about the future. Our left hemisphere is designed to take that enormous collage of the present moment and start picking out details, and more details about those details. It then categorizes and organizes all that information, associates it with everything in the past we've ever learned, and projects into the future all of our possibilities. And our left hemisphere thinks in language. It's that ongoing brain chatter that connects me and my internal world to my external world. It's that little voice that says to me, hey, you got to remember to pick up bananas on your way home. I need them in the morning. It's that calculating intelligence that reminds me when I have to do my laundry. But perhaps most important, it's that little voice that says to me, I am. I am. And as soon as my left hemisphere says to me, I am, I become separate. I become a single, solid individual, separate from the energy flow around me and separate from you. And this is a portion of my brain that I lost on the morning of my stroke. On the morning of the stroke, I woke up to a pounding pain behind my left eye. And it was the kind of pain, caustic pain, that you get when you bite into ice cream. And it just gripped me, and then it released me. And then it just gripped me, and then it released me. And it was very unusual for me to ever experience any kind of pain, so I thought, okay, I'll just start my normal routine. So I got up and I jumped onto my cardia glider, which is a full body, full exercise machine. And I'm jamming away on this thing, and I'm realizing that my hands look like primitive claws grasping onto the bar. And I thought, that's very peculiar. And I looked down at my body, and I thought, whoa, I'm a weird-looking thing. And it was as though my consciousness had shifted away from my normal perception of reality, where I'm the person on the machine having the experience, to some esoteric space where I'm witnessing myself having this experience. And it was all very peculiar, and my headache was just getting worse, so I get off the machine, and I'm walking across my living room floor, and I realize that everything inside of my body has slowed way down. And every step is very rigid and very deliberate. There's no fluidity to my pace, and there's this constriction in my area of perception, so I'm just focused on internal systems. And I'm standing in my bathroom getting ready to step into the shower, and I could actually hear the dialogue inside of my body. I heard a little voice saying, okay, you muscles, you got to contract, and you muscles, you relax. And then I lost my balance, and I'm propped up against the wall. And I looked down at my arm, and I realized that I can no longer define the boundaries of my body. I can't define where I begin and where I end, because the atoms and the molecules of my arm blended with the atoms and molecules of the wall. And all I could detect was this energy. And I'm asking myself, what is wrong with me? What is going on? And in that moment, my brain chatter, my left hemisphere brain chatter, went totally silent. Just like someone took a remote control and pushed the mute button. Total silence. And at first I was shocked to find myself inside of a silent mind. But then I was immediately captivated by the magnificence of the energy around me. And because I could no longer identify the boundaries of my body, I felt enormous and expansive. I felt at one with all the energy that was, and it was beautiful there. And then all of a sudden, my left hemisphere comes back online, and it says to me, hey, we got a problem, we got to get some help. And I'm going, oh, I got a problem. So it's like, okay, I got a problem. But then I immediately drifted right back out into the consciousness, and I affectionately refer to this space as La La Land. But it was beautiful there. Imagine what it would be like to be totally disconnected from your brain chatter that connects you to the external world. So here I am in this space, and my job and any stress related to my job, it was gone. And I felt lighter in my body. And imagine all of the relationships in the external world and any stressors related to any of those, they were gone. And I felt this sense of peacefulness. And imagine what it would feel like to lose 37 years of emotional baggage. Oh, I felt euphoria. It was beautiful there. And then again, my left hemisphere comes online and it says, hey, you've got to pay attention. We've got to get help. And I'm thinking, I got to get help. I got to focus. So I get out of the shower and I'm mechanically dressed and I'm walking around my apartment and I'm thinking, I got to get to work. I got to get to work. Can I drive? Can I drive? And in that moment, my right arm went totally paralyzed by my side. Then I realized, oh my gosh, I'm having a stroke. I'm having a stroke. And then the next thing my brain says to me is, wow, this is so cool. This is so cool. How many brain scientists have the opportunity to study their own brain from the inside out? And then it crosses my mind, but I'm a very busy woman. I don't have time for a stroke. It's like, okay, I can't stop the stroke from happening, so I'll do this for a week or two, and then I'll get back to my routine. Okay, so I got to call help. I got to call work. I couldn't remember the number at work. So I remembered in my office I had a business card with my number on it. So I go into my business room. I pull out a 3-inch stack of business cards. And I'm looking at the card on top. And even though I could see clearly in my mind's eye what my business card looked like, I couldn't tell if this was my card or not, because all I could see were pixels. And the pixels of the words blended with the pixels of the background and the pixels of the symbols, and I just couldn't tell. And then I would wait for what I call a wave of clarity. And in that moment, I would be able to reattach to normal reality. And I could tell, that's not the card, that's not the card, that's not the card. It took me 45 minutes to get 1 inch down inside of that stack of cards. In the meantime, for 45 minutes, the hemorrhage is getting bigger in my left hemisphere. I do not understand numbers. I do not understand a telephone, but it's the only plan I have. So I take the foam pad and I put it right here. I take the business card, I put it right here, and I'm matching the shape of the squiggles on the card to the shape of the squiggles on the foam pad. But then I would drift back out into La La Land and not remember if when I come back if I'd already dialed those numbers. So I had to wield my paralyzed arm like a stump and cover the numbers as I went along and push them so that as I would come back to normal reality, I'd be able to tell, yes, I've already dialed that number. Eventually, the whole number gets dialed, and I'm listening to the phone, and my colleague picks up the phone, and he says to me, "Roo, roo, roo, roo." And I think to myself, oh my gosh, he sounds like a golden retriever. And so I say to him, clear in my mind, I say to him, this is Jill, I need help. And what comes out of my voice is, "Roo, roo, roo." And I think, oh my gosh, I sound like a golden retriever. So I didn't know that I couldn't speak or understand language until I tried. So he recognizes that I need help, and he gets me help. And a little while later, I'm riding in an ambulance from one hospital across Boston to Mass General Hospital. And I curl up into a little fetal ball. And just like a balloon with the last bit of air just right out of the balloon, I just felt my energy lift and I felt my spirit surrender. And in that moment, I knew that I was no longer the choreographer of my life. And either the doctors rescue my body and give me a second chance at life, or this was perhaps my moment of transition. When I woke later that afternoon, I was shocked to discover that I was still alive. When I felt my spirit surrender, I said goodbye to my life, and my mind was now suspended between two very opposite planes of reality. Stimulation coming in through my sensory systems felt like pure pain. Light burned my brain like wildfire, and sounds were so loud and chaotic that I could not pick a voice out from the background noise, and I just wanted to escape. Because I could not identify the position of my body in space, I felt enormous and expansive, like a genie just liberated from her bottle. And my spirit soared free like a great whale gliding through a sea of silent euphoria. Nirvana. I found nirvana. And I remember thinking there's no way I would ever be able to squeeze the enormousness of myself back inside this tiny little body. But then I realized, but I'm still alive. I'm still alive, and I have found nirvana. And if I have found nirvana and I'm still alive, then everyone who is alive can find nirvana. And I pictured a world filled with beautiful, peaceful, compassionate, loving people who knew that they could come to this space at any time and that they could purposely choose to step to the right of their left hemispheres and find this peace. And then I realized what a tremendous gift this experience could be. What a stroke of insight this could be to how we live our lives. And it motivated me to recover. 2.5 weeks after the hemorrhage, the surgeons went in and they removed a blood clot the size of a golf ball that was pushing on my language centers. Here I am with my mama, who's a true angel in my life. It took me 8 years to completely recover. So, who are we? We are the life force power of the universe with manual dexterity and 2 cognitive minds. And we have the power to choose moment by moment who and how we want to be in the world. Right here, right now, I can step into the consciousness of my right hemisphere where we are. I am the life force power of the universe. I am the life force power of the 50 trillion beautiful molecular geniuses that make up my form, at one with all that is. Or I can choose to step into the consciousness of my left hemisphere, where I become a single individual, a solid, separate from the flow, separate from you. I am Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor, intellectual, neuroanatomist. These are the we inside of me. Which would you choose? Which do you choose? And when? I believe that the more time we spend choosing to run the deep inner peace circuitry of our right hemispheres, the more peace we will project into the world, and the more peaceful our planet will be. And I thought that was an idea worth spreading. Thank you.
So far, the 2 examples of Barbara and Jill. And now that we have seen both cases, the woman who changed her brain by Barbara I.S.I.S. and Jill Bolte Taylor's experience with the stroke she had suffered, let us recall the motto of this symposium and have a look at both films under the special perspective. At the same time, let us bear in mind what we have heard at the beginning of our contribution from Hans-Peter Dörr. It should thus not be too difficult to find our summarized thesis in their contributions. Already during the first seconds of Barbara I.S.I.S.'s talk, our intuition is awakened when she compares our physical brain with the Milky Way. Her very important main statement is given shortly after the beginning of her lecture when she says, "Not only our brain shapes us, we can shape our brain." This gives as a keynote to show, as we wish to do tonight, that it is not our brain which is the impulse generator, but it is consciousness which uses the brain as a transmitter, whom We could question otherwise. Would she, Barbara, call we, if not our consciousness, at the beginning of her speech? Her certainty is of course a result of her own experience. In the film, she reports on her constrained left hemisphere and how she handled this. It is important here to bear in mind that this part of the brain contains the rationale, that which makes us understand cause and effect, as well as connections and concepts, and also contains the speech area. This is followed by another eye-opening experience. When she learns to train the faculties and abilities located but blocked in this part of the brain with especially focused efforts. That is, she confronted herself with these blocked faculties and worked hard to understand their connections and concepts. This took her several months. The result of this training was finally a restructuring of her brain. It became especially striking to her when she realized that she was able now to understand even philosophical texts and thoughts, something she could not before that, and which she did not train especially. This newly developed capacity to understand such kind of texts was therefore a side effect of her trainings and showed the restructuring of her brain. It is obvious that all this could not be initiated from her brain itself, but from that something which moves behind or on top of it, namely her consciousness. The very fact that she was ashamed about her own restrictions shows her inner conflict and her fight with herself. It is a strong indicator for a sound consciousness, trying to analyze and to correct the situation. Something which is a capacity of completely rational character. How could a restricted, predominant brain argue with itself to correct the deficiencies? If there existed such faculties of the brain, all patients of the world could also overcome their weaknesses, most naturally, and alone, and we would not talk about them now. Had there not been an impulse from outside, that is, the information on neuroplasticity of the brain of rats, meeting an alert consciousness and perception which initiated reflection, absolutely nothing would have happened. The ancient wisdom teaches us first ideation, then phrasing, and finally the implementation. Barbara was already searching for a solution, as her father had managed to make her understand that she herself has had to find a solution for her problem. Her awareness and attention, that is her consciousness, was already sharpened and focused, which she expressed already by her being ashamed. If consciousness were a function of the brain, this would have been impossible because of the restricted performance of the brain which she would probably not have been capable to perceive and to process the information necessary for the solution of the problem. How consciousness experiences such a sudden dysfunction of a brain which until then was sound can be shown by the case of Jill Bolte Taylor. It must be noted first that Jill is a neurologist by profession and therefore a specialist in the area of brain research. Sorry. For our understanding her case, this means that by her professional background already she was able to describe and allocate authentical the occurrence of having a stroke. Here, too, unlike the case of Barbara, a consciousness had been in a way prepared for what happened. This means that although the capability of her left hemisphere was heavily restricted, it was able to precisely describe the course of events. One of the main messages of this film can be found in this fact. She tells us the story of her experience from the perspective of an observer, and from this perspective clearly distinguishes the faculties of the left of the rational hemisphere and the right hemisphere, the irrational. Please note that from this perspective she does neither judge nor polarize, but only states what happens at the very moment. This is important because the wisdom tradition shows this as an indicator for pure human consciousness detached from the physical body. If this were a function of a brain, how would it then be possible that while being so disabled, the brain could be so highly efficient regarding itself, analyzing itself, being aware and able to point out the damage? We also get an important hint here that even the rational capabilities are not seated in the brain, but in that subtle body which in Sanskrit is called manas, with the meaning of the thinker, or to reflect or contemplate. As a consequence to the damaged parts of her brain, Jill consciously goes through a near-death experience. This release of her physical or earthly limitations enables her, at least to some extent, to experience the real dimension of her consciousness. Now, not focused on her own being anymore, this consciousness immerses partly into the so-called oneness of all things and life, and therefore as much vaster area of perception and cognition than before. We remember here Hans Peter Dürr's picture of the whitecaps, the waves, the ocean and the re-immersion into it. For Jill, this experience is essentially and totally changed her view on life. She now expresses her full conviction that in the sphere of consciousness, we are all connected with each other. We are the energy, she said, of 50 billion molecules, and with this, as Hans-Peter Dürr would express it, we ourselves are uniting the drop and the ocean. I think with the information we got this morning, with the ideas Hans-Peter Dürr told us, and with the examples of Barbara and Jill, we have a good basement for a fruitful discussion now. Please, Claudia.
I don't need this. I hope so. So first question, do you understand me? Please say ja. Yeah. So at first I want to clarify something. I'm not a teacher and you are not a pupil or student put to test. We want to put our consciousness together and start an open discussion. So first question, does someone want to comment on what we have seen or give his or her impression about the contributions of Jill and Barbara?
So first of all, I think it was wonderful to see these examples that bring to life what we were talking about this morning. So thanks for sharing that. What I was curious about is Hans-Peter Dürr. He somehow must have come on the track or on the idea that it's spirit, as he says, or consciousness working behind what's going on. Do you have any idea where he picked this up and how he explains this in like a scientific way? So what is rationale behind it is? Do you understand my question?
Mm-hmm, yeah, of course.
All right.
You need to answer, I think.
It was a result of his researches, together with Werner Heisenberg. They discovered this with the uncertainty principle. We described it before. That the results of this principle let the door open for a kind of free will of a particle, because it was not possible to calculate in which direction a particle is going. And so that makes your thinking, what can stay behind such a particle? A consciousness, and that makes them thinking more deep.
I mean, from the way he was uttering his ideas, I think it was quite clear that he was also studying Buddhism in a way. Yeah, I think so. I mean, you find it in several expressions he uses, and it is, I think, a point of discussion between many modern physicists. No. Physicians, not physicists. Physician. You have, I think most of you know Fritjof Capra some time ago, who published many books on that subject too. And I think maybe you can see that in a connection somehow. But maybe Herman can answer that better than I can.
I don't know, but I can maybe give some additional information. One of the main things was in quantum physics is the first principle that things happens in quantum, so in leaps, in steps, and not in a linear way. That was one big question, why? And the other one was that it was in a number of cases impossible to do an absolute 100% prediction. What happens with a particular quant? And that started a lot of philosophy in that time. What is the reason and how can you explain that matter was, let's say, not very long before seen as a very solid block? How is it possible that matter can behave like an individual, like human being doing? So there starts the idea, and in that time, let's say, the Mahayana Buddhistic point of view of life was becoming more and more popular. And it is even nowadays well known that Mahayana Buddhism in the United States is very often studied by people doing this type of studies and research, because that way of thinking give him the clue and at least say a step up to understand what happens in matter between brackets.
I just want to contribute. Until the date of his contribution, obviously he didn't find any contradictions in his research. So this is interesting, I think. So the matter and spirit thing. Yeah.
I really sympathize with the idea that consciousness is not produced by the brain. However, I'm a brain scientist and I have some critical questions, if I may. To draw immediately causality between the fact that, you know, for example, in the example of the last woman, that while realizing that her brain was deteriorating, at least the left side, and what she experienced by being overwhelmed by her right side brain, doesn't mean that the left side was not working. She told also in the film that sometimes there were moments that the left side came back and that she could have a realization, and other moments she lost. For example, lately scientists have discovered that not only the brain, but for example also our heart has its own intelligence. By having a lot of neurons in the heart which have their own memory and their own capacity to memorize. Also, other parts of the body do have these neurons and can communicate information and also store information. So my question is that maybe in the moment we do not fully realize how this complex, also concerned on the biological material level, unity is built and communicating with outside, inside, etc. And doesn't say that esoteric theories or Buddhism is not relevant. For sure it is. I'm very interested. I'm a Buddhist myself, but also a scientist. And how can you be so sure as you are that consciousness is not part of our biological existence?
Well, it is pity that you missed this morning, because that is exactly what we have explained this morning, that the brain cases are just cases. And the focus for us is on the fact that the consciousness is able to retrain the brain. That is what we try to prove in this. Yeah? And what we have explained this morning is that we have to deal with consciousness, and certain state of consciousness is showing to us as matter. So from Theosophical point of view, we say everything is consciousness, but certain states of consciousness in a certain state of evolution show to us like matter, energy, forces. Yeah. So we say everything is consciousness.
But there is also a vision now in science that everything could be an illusion, even the material dimension. So we can go on with this.
No.
And my question is,
I was
how
not
do
yet
you
finished.
prove it?
Sorry, I was not yet finished. What we like to say there is that you have a cooperation of consciousness in different hierarchy, in different level of, let's say, evolution. And that all is having communication with each other with the conscious part of the different level. So what we try to say is that matter is having a conscious part. The human consciousness works with the consciousness of matter, and that is the intercommunication part of, let's say, what you can call cells or matter. So it means a type of communications between consciousness and consciousness on different level. So, and there you can have the answer that we are able to retrain, that we are able to train our cells in our body, because we say it is not only the brain. What is a conscious function in our body? It is the organs, it is the stomach, it is every individual cell. This is an old idea what you can find back in the Theosophy, but you also find back then in the Neoplatonic world, what is called emanation. Yeah? So that is the picture we try to draw.
Okay, but like in Buddhism, we say consciousness is not separate. It's simply from which angle we are looking at various aspects of the crystal, so to say. And if you separate it, you're already making divisions, also saying like in an evolutionary scale, which is maybe not the reality at all.
We don't make separation. We say separation is impossible. We have to deal with one big, let's call it, organism. And there we have to say, our principal point of view is that we go from infinite. And the infinite in itself is what called by Dürr the ocean. And all, let's say, the water molecules in the oceans are all, let's say, focal point of conscience. Yeah? So conscience is, in a certain way, a type of illusion of the whole. And in a certain, let's say, think of individual conscience is an illusion, in fact, if you look to the totality. Because there is only totality. And it is what he expressed very nicely with the waves. We think, because we are a wave somewhere, oh, that is me, and that is another one. But in principle, there is no separation at all. Yeah? So there is always intercommunication, there is always interconnection with everything. So that is, let's say, the more fundamental part we start from.
Yeah, I don't know if people are here familiar with a theory it's called by David Brown. It's called about calibration. And that's really, I sympathize with that we have different levels of calibration. And the different levels of calibration relate with different levels of consciousness. And it's not separate, it's all one, but they're different. Like this morning, I was following your lectures on my phone because I had to work. But I think this idea, this piano model, that really appeals to me. These strings of tones still connected in an octave.
That will we, let's say, explain an exercise tomorrow as one of our first lectures to explain in more detail what we have just started today, how the intercommunication is going. So I hope you have time tomorrow to be here.
I hope so.
If not, it will be on the internet. Not only live tomorrow, but also 4 weeks, till 4 weeks afterwards, yeah?
I will definitely watch.
Okay.
Consciousness has two aspects, matter and spirit, so it's not a separated thing. It's in itself the same, but higher developed or lower developed. But it's both consciousness. So perhaps we have a closer look to what Barbara told us, the woman with the mental block. What made her change her situation? Can you imagine what was the reason why she changed her situation?
Yeah, but what make it change, or the reason is her father told, you have to look to solutions when you have a problem. And I think the contact of the father inspires her, that she think, okay, I decide now only to look for the solution. And that's the reason. Mm-hmm. And not stay in the problem. Just totally focus on the solution.
That with all the disabilities she had, she was ashamed. She was aware of her problems, yeah, and searched from her youth, yeah, for a solution. And I think this is a good indicator too for an intact consciousness. Yeah. Although her brain was restricted. Yeah.
But I think for me it was an important focus in the statement that the father say, don't stay in the problem, but if there is no solution, create yourself a solution. Or look for opportunities or work out opportunities for yourself. And then she makes reference to the other Russian guys and so on. So what I found myself a little bit missing is what type of technique was used over there. Mm-hmm. But okay, that is something what we easily can look up. That is no problem. Yeah.
I would like to add something that was interesting in Dürr's story. That was, he mentioned hope. Mm-hmm. That there was hope that was the driving force to change. And I think in this example, it was the hope coming forth from trust in her father's words that made her look for the answer.
Although she was at the end of her force, yeah, because she tried to commit suicide, and because of that, she was, she got the hope that she can overcome the problems. Yeah.
She said something like, "I want to mention it to people what is happening to them too." She wanted to, like healing the others. And isn't that something of the heart? And it was also mentioned in the other side. The mededogen, how would you say that in English?
Compassion.
Yeah, the compassion for the others. Perhaps that is the connection directly.
But for me, for instance, to put this same type of approach on a little bit lower level, if you are not good in languages, you should not step away from it. You should put more effort in it, yeah, and motivate yourself in doing this. So train yourself, yeah.
And it is already at the universities. There are programs where you can train your memory. I can give the example of a program we have at Freie Universität in Berlin. So you can just sit on at your computer and have a whole program of training memory, and it looks so simple. It is really something you do for 10 minutes a day, but it increases enormously your facilities to remember, to calculate, to the flexibility of your thinking process. It is really something which some years ago nobody thought that those simple things might help to have easier process of thinking or memorizing things, and even might help preventing some kinds of dementia at an early stage. Yeah.
Mag het in het Nederland?
Ja.
Wat mij opviel in de vrouw die met die blokkades zat, is dat ze eigenlijk aanvankelijk helemaal geen idee van concepten en dergelijke had. En hoe ze dan toch in staat is om de oefeningen te bedenken die wel leiden tot die concepten en die verbindingen tot stand komen. Dat vond ik een merkwaardig...
Okay, I will try to translate you. What he noticed was that the lady was not able to have any clue about concepts and other dimensions and that type of things, and still she was able to create something for herself. That was the background of my question. That was very interesting. How she was more or less doing that step up of bootstrapping method. How you come from nothing to something.
I think I read it somewhere. It was like in a kind of trial and error. Yeah. She tried out what helps her, and then she developed that. So it was really not that she received any concept from anybody else, but she developed it from her own experiences.
Yeah. Well, wasn't she inspired by this professor who found out by this other guy where exactly was her dysfunction?
That's true.
So she knew what was going on there, and she used exercises to stimulate that part of her brain.
I think she was inspired by that, and she got the hope that she can change something, because she found out that she has this block in her brain, and she can use the neuroplasticity to overcome it. And that gave her hope to really try something. Yeah, you had a question.
Thank you. I just heard something that made me think. You said the solution to the damaged brain was the fact that her consciousness was intact. Could it be the other way around?
No. Question, can you phrase it a little bit better? Or a little bit more deeply? You say that what is the situation if the brain is intact?
The solution to the fact that she was able to repair her brain was the fact, you just said that her consciousness was still intact, or was intact. So she was able to repair her brain.
That is the answer? Or
No, and my question is, could it be the other way around?
So that the brain was intact and the consciousness was not intact.
Exactly.
Well, from our Theosophical point of view, there is not much difference in it. Because if you go from the intercommunication, so there is always two things what works together then. So we don't think that the cells in the brain are, let's say, independent of the other neighbor cells, or let's say the overheading consciousness. So you have always there the question: is it a damage in the brain, like the last movie was, I think, a clear example, because the lady was already up to an academic level and then lose a part of it, and the other lady was born with that handicap. So they had the question. So there are two things, because if you are on a low level of development, you have the situation that your consciousness is not far developed and the brain cells are accordingly more or less in the same condition. In the last situation, that lady was developed on conscious level and also on brain level, and then she had it damaged, and then she lost the expression part of it, and then she expressed very well, and then she has to work for 8 years to regain the expression possibility. Yeah? So I think in principle there are two different cases. For me, the first one was more a bootstrap technique in how to train yourself. And the other one was more a technique from how to regain what you had before and was lost, and how do you retrain yourself, yeah?
I don't know exactly about this particular case, but you're saying things about she got information and thereby motivation and thereby hope. But I don't think it's necessary to have hope. If there is a will, the will to do something or achieve something, and you are dedicated to it, it will find its way. So you don't need information, and information can therefore demotivate you, because you will create difficulties with your mind. If you see the information and think, oh, this is impossible, you will not achieve it because it will come against you. But if you have no motivation, you are absolutely dedicated, then you can achieve everything, I think.
Yes, we agree with you. Yeah.
Okay, we heard about the strange experiences of Jill when she told about the switches between the two hemispheres of her brain. How can we explain that from what we have heard today? I repeat, for example, two things. She said the atoms of her body blended with the atoms around her. All I could detect was this energy. So this was her right hemisphere. And her left hemisphere always said, do something, you have to get help, you have to do something, you have to call your colleagues. You need to do something. How can we explain that?
Well, perhaps you could say, if you use the analogy of a radio, that one part of the brain is the short wave, and the other part of the brain is the long wave, which picks up different signals.
I choose then for having to say that you are two types of transmitters and receivers in your head, yeah, with different qualities. But what she also explained is one was, let's say, a typical what she called parallel processing system, and the other one a serial processing system. Yeah. Well, the first one in parallel, that means that you can handle in parallel different sort of information. Yeah. So if you walk in a city, you see traffic, you see lights, you see shop windows, and so on, and all that information is more or less processed in parallel. So that is one. And serial means that you do one step after the other. That is thinking about conclusions. What should I do? How can I become, let's say, more what she was doing? and better trained in philosophy, what type of steps I have to do, and then you do a type of sequence in future, in time. Yep.
I just want to bring some things up that maybe might confuse this kind of point of view. For example, there have been people who have had an operation and part of the left hemisphere or right hemisphere is taken out. And we know that some of these people were able to transfer functions and kinds of thinking to the other hemisphere, which means that there is not such a strict separation between the two hemispheres. The brain cannot function properly if there is not a constant communication and cooperation between the two hemispheres. And by the corpus callosum, as we have seen in the film. Or someone said that, I don't remember. Yeah. So, from a scientific point of view, I don't know exactly the Theosophic point of view, but it's not totally solid. Yeah, it's not solid that the right brain is producing intuitive thinking, the thinking of oneness, spiritual experiences. Yes, we know if we do the CAT scans and MRI scans that if we, do that with Tibetan monks, parts of their brain are lighting up in that area. But also the parts in the left brain are lighting up. So I think to simplify the story that much is also a bit dangerous. It's more complex.
That is a very interesting point. So what is your consequence then if you say that the right hemisphere can take over functions of the left hemisphere?
And vice versa. Even.
Yeah, and vice versa.
Yeah.
What is your conclusion?
My conclusion is that the brain is just the machine, and that the creator behind the machine is separate.
Exactly.
Yeah? And I get this conclusion even more when I read the book from Ibn Alexander, who was a brain surgeon who got an acute meningitis and who was in a deep coma, and none of his brain was working, his cognitive brain, but still he had very clear visions and understandings of consciousness. That was pure consciousness. Yeah.
You see, and that is exactly the point.
So I do believe, I mean, that's why I'm here, of course. I do state that probably we will find out, also scientifically, quite soon, that consciousness is not per se biologically captured in the brain, yes, so to say, that it is above or around the brain or even somewhere else maybe. But it is still a hypothesis.
Yes, and that is exactly what we were expressing. We had the example of this morning, for example, of a person who had a brain like this. Yeah? So, and that for us is the proof, you can say, for the old teachings that the consciousness is not bound to the brain. It uses the brain as a mediator, you can say. We had several expressions on that, but what is the driving force is always consciousness. And that is the reason and the proof why the other part of the brain can be used for every function necessary.
This is the big challenge for scientists in the 21st century to rediscover this old knowledge.
Yes. And I think the internet and newspapers are full of ideas exactly on that subject. It is really an adventure to read those many examples which are there of people, experiences, the locked-in syndrome, for example. Or we have another example which was impressing us quite much of a young boy who lost all his physical functions. And in German is called "When I Was Invisible." He was caught in his own physical bodies, could not express himself, but his whole his consciousness was functioning. He was experiencing everything he was around himself. And with a strong will, he managed to regain his physical abilities again. yeah, and especially because of that strong will you expressed, and in a way with the help or with the stimulus of people around him who believed that there is, though the body seems to be nearly dead, not functioning at all, there is consciousness in it. And there is a chance that with help and with much patience, you can reawaken the functions of the body so that that person can live a normal life again. And I think that is the biggest hope you can give to all people, that they do not have to accept a situation where they are disabled in any kind. They can always do something, always. And well, how many?
Maybe it is good to say that the examples we have used is not used because we think they represent the full theosophical ideas, but just prove the idea that conscience is able to retrain the cells or on the cells level. That is the first thing. The second thing, I think, part of the theosophical teachings is that the other organs playing also an important fact in what we are, and not only the brain, because the heart, from a certain point of view, is even more important than the brain. Yeah? And that is research what starts not, let's say, that long ago, maybe 10 years or so in the United States by the HeartMath Institute. And there you can find a lot of nice examples from what it means. But the main thing is that it is conscious on a higher level what works with conscious on a lower level, and it is due to our habit that we use it on a certain way. So the separation between the left and the right is more a case on this particular moment that it is a principal case. It is more a type of phase in our evolution than it is something what is to be forever, as it is. Yeah? Because some people are able to write left, others to write with their right hand. But if you train yourself, you can learn it so well left as right. Yeah? But we don't do it because we don't find that very efficient. Yeah? But it is still possible. Yeah?
So I think also sometimes you cannot repair damage in the brain, but the consciousness takes the part which is not working properly to another part of the brain which is working, and then you get the ability again. So you are right if you say it's not a thing about left and right. Yeah.
Yeah, the brain is fully plastic.
Yes, fully plastic. There, yeah.
Maybe I may add something. I think the facts are that she had two kinds of consciousness. One, she was intellectual, and the other one, she was, in my view, already in the process of dying, the beginning of it. So maybe it has nothing to do with the left and the right hemisphere. She interprets it as being a part of the left and the right. But I think that maybe it's not true, because it just, as far as I can see it, it's the process of dying that she is describing, and then she gets back to Earth, and getting back to Earth, she's intellectual, she knows that she had to phone her colleagues, etc., and then she goes back to the inner part, and that's the part which she called the nirvana part. It's something that you can always see by a person who has a near-death experience, and then she goes back to her body. So, because I agree, you cannot localize kind of consciousness in the left or in the right hemisphere. So that is just an interpretation afterwards, I think.
Yes. Yeah, might be. Yeah.
Yes, I think I can only repeat what Mr. Voorham just said. That, in my opinion, you cannot locate in the left side or the right-hand side of your brain your consciousness. Consciousness has no location. Also, I'm convinced that you cannot discover consciousness because it is not is less than electromagnetic field. Yeah, it is a matter that you cannot. It is not. In fact, it's not a matter. You cannot say we are going to discover consciousness, because it's something that you cannot measure. You cannot identify.
That might be
Yeah.
true, but you should realize one thing is that consciousness on the higher level has to work together with consciousness on the lower level, what we can call brain cells. And there is a habit to use a certain type of brain cells. And that is what you can see on MRI, is that there is, let's say, a dominant effect on the right and a little bit on the left, or maybe 50-50, or just maybe on the left. And that is a matter, I think, of training, but also a matter of finding a way in your configuration to express yourself. Yeah?
Yeah, but it gives a wrong idea to say that your consciousness is on one side or on the other side.
No,
in
well,
my
we don't
opinion.
say that. No, we don't say that. No, the expression, yeah, and the cooperation is on the left or on the right.
Okay, that
Yeah.
you can do.
Yeah.
Also, I have a second question that somebody said that your consciousness can be hurt by an accident. Also, I don't believe that's possible that you can hurt or bless your consciousness. You cannot affect your consciousness by something. Yeah? What's your opinion about that?
What you try to say is that by an incident or so, an accident.
Yeah, you say you can hurt your brain. Of course, that's clear.
You can hurt your brain.
Yeah, by an operation or by a tumor or whatever.
Yeah.
But you cannot hurt your consciousness. You cannot say my consciousness is damaged by something.
No. Well, there's another way of hurting it, of course.
I think it's perhaps also an interpretation of that person. It thinks it hears her or his brain.
You can destroy your consciousness.
Yeah,
I
maybe
think
you
are
can-
not able to do that.
No.
Maybe you can put it very simple. You can hurt or you can damage the organ through which your consciousness wants to express itself. Yeah, you can damage that, but the consciousness itself not. The material expression of the consciousness,
We agree
which
about that,
in a
yeah.
way is also a part of that consciousness. Yeah, but because it's so to say it's condensed part. Yeah, it's most material part. It's material expression at that point. Yeah?
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other comment? So then I think we can slowly come to an end. What would you take home with you tonight when you consider what you have heard the whole day?
Well, what I would take with me tonight is the incredible power that sit in us and is becoming more and more visible. And the other part was that fortunately scientific people and spiritual people are coming together. And this is how the world will change.
Yeah, that's a good.
I thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I think we will close the situation or the event of this evening. We will